So if you'll help me welcome our first presenter for today's webinar, we've got Marcia Waters. Marcia Waters has been with the Colorado Division of Real Estate since August of 2005. Marcia started with the division as a criminal investigator for the Real Estate Commission, was promoted to chief investigator in 2006. In 2010, she was promoted to the position of division director. The Division of Real Estate licenses and regulates approximately 50,000 real estate professionals. Mrs. Waters serves as the administrator for the Real Estate Commission, the Board of Real Estate Appraisers, the Board of Mortgage Loan Originators, and the HOA Information and Resource Center. Please help me welcome Marcia for a quick update from Dora. Thanks, Marcia.
Well, thanks for having me. And my update is going to be specific to property management issues. So before I go into, we've changed some regulations back in June regarding trust accounts. But before I go into what actually changed, I thought I'd give you guys a little bit of historical background about why the regulations changed. So we have a group of financial examiners, and prior to the pandemic, they used to go out and physically visit your guys' brokerages. They do it virtually now. And our goal is to complete 10 brokerage audits per month. A lot of what they focus on has to do with property management because that's our largest pool of real estate brokers that actually hold funds of others. And it's a consumer harm issue as far as if those funds are mismanaged. So they will focus on property management, although they will also do audits of sales brokerages. Typically, if you're not holding trust accounts with a sales brokerage, we're looking at your transaction files to make sure that you have all of the required contract forms. But when they go out and look at a broker that does property management, we're looking at your trust accounts, making sure that you're doing your three-way reconciliations. And when they initiate an audit, you get notified via a letter, and then they will start asking you questions about like what type of business do you engage in, and they'll ask you if you do short-term rentals, which a short-term rental doesn't require a real estate broker's license, but what we do see is we have a lot of brokers that do property management, and then they also do short-term rentals as well. So what happened over the course of the past year is as we were going out doing more and more of these brokerage audits, we were finding more and more real estate brokers were doing short-term rentals. Those seem to be managed a little differently than you typically manage your long-term rental properties. For example, you've got to do the cash basis of accounting per the commission regulations unless you've got another agreement to do the accrual basis. And when we start looking at your trust accounts, you may be doing the cash basis of accounting for your long-term rentals, but the accrual basis of accounting for your short-term rentals. And this was kind of tripping some of the brokers up because there's a regulation on the books, and it's been on the books for a long time, and this is a state statute that says it's a violation of the license law if you fail to account for or to remit within a reasonable time any money coming into a licensee's possession that belongs to others, whether acting as a real estate broker or otherwise, and failing to keep records relative to the money, which records shall contain such information as may be prescribed by the rules of the commission relative thereto, and shall be subject to audit by the Real Estate Commission. So as we started seeing real estate brokers doing short-term rentals, those are still swept into the commission's jurisdiction because of that statute. Another example is also when you manage your own rental properties, security deposits, those are funds of another. Those are the tenant's funds. So you're subjected to the commission's regulations for those as well. So there were several brokers that ended up going in front of the Real Estate Commission last year and then into this year about how they were managing short-term rentals, how they were managing their own investment properties. And at one point, several of the attorneys that represent our brokers in our complaint process had requested a sit-down meeting with division staff to discuss what was going on. And we kind of explained, basically, here's our jurisdiction. Anytime a real estate broker accepts money of another, they're held by the commission standards, and that throws them into the commission's jurisdiction. So if as a licensed real estate broker, I wanted to have a painting business on the side, and I was collecting deposits for that painting business, essentially based on the commission regulations, I now have to comply with all of their rules as far as how I do the accounting, which prior to the end of July would have meant I would have had to do a three-way reconciliation on any paint deposits that I would have collected as for my painting business, as an example. So during this discussion with the attorneys, there was some real concerns raised on their behalf for their clients about the liability that is then placed on the employing broker. So, there was concerns about, oh my gosh, if Marcia as a broker associate has an investment property, she's supposed to run her security deposits through the brokerage firm, and now the employing broker is responsible for doing the three-way reconciliations and the full accounting of those funds. Based on the discussions that we'd had with the attorneys, what it amounts to is we proposed modifications to the commission regulations to really kind of parse out what the record keeping and also the accounting regulations would be when you're doing licensed real estate duties versus non-brokerage services. So that's what you saw the commission discuss in June, was modification of those rules. The big one that we modified was Rule 5.11. That rule specifically addresses money belonging to others for non-brokerage services. So what it amounts to under the new regulation is at the brokerage firm level, it's got to be in the policy, the brokerage policy, as far as how the employing broker expects those funds to be accounted for. So the employing broker can say, I want you to run all of your funds, including the money belonging to other for non-brokerage services, I want you to run them through the brokerage. And if that's what the employing broker elects to have happen, then the employing broker is held responsible for still doing a three-way reconciliation of the funds that don't even pertain to brokerage services. Or the employing broker can have a policy manual that says, no, I do not want you running the money belonging to others for non-brokerage services through the brokerage firm's trust accounts. You need to set up your own trust accounts. And if I had an investment property and I was a broker associate, then that responsibility falls on me. But the difference is the regulation only requires a two-way reconciliation if the trust accounts are held by the broker associates. So you just need to make sure that the journal reconciles with the reconciled bank balance and you'll be fine. You don't have to do the three-way reconciliation. So that went into effect, I believe it was July 30th. Those are the new accounting standards. Bear in mind, when you deal with money belonging to others, the commission does have the authority to request your records pertaining to those funds. That's in state statute, and then it's just reiterated in the regulation. So we really haven't changed how we are going out and doing audits at this point, other than we're not looking for the three-way reconciliation if they're trust accounts held by the individual brokers, not the employing brokers. The one thing that I would caution you guys about, and this goes for anybody holding trust accounts, is you need to make sure that the financial institution that you place your trust accounts with is those are actual trust accounts, because some of the banks will refer to them just as trust accounts, but they don't afford any of the protections that an actual trust or an escrow account does. We have put together a list of financial institutions that we're aware of that provide actual trust accounts, and it's on our website. If you have difficulty finding it, just shoot me an email and I can send it out to you. But that has been one of the big issues that we've noticed when we've gone out and done the financial examinations, is we have a lot of brokers that think they have trust accounts when they don't actually have them. So in preparation for today, I had reached out to my examiners and asked them if there was anything that I would like to pass on from them to you all. And the overwhelming message that I got from them was, you need to do your three-way reconciliations if you hold trust accounts on a monthly basis. And if it's at the brokerage or at the individual broker level, where you're holding them for non-brokerage services, you still have to do them on a monthly basis, although it's just a two-way reconciliation. What we find is when you get selected for audit, or when a lot of our brokers get selected for audit, that's when they choose to do the reconciliation. And you're required by regulation to do them on a monthly basis. So make sure you're doing that. Also, when you're selected for an audit, that's not a good time to scramble to try to get all of your transaction documents together in the file. You should have them already. An audit should not come as this horrific surprise of, oh my gosh, now I have to scramble to catch up. You should have all of your files and your accounts ready to go if that audit letter comes out. The other thing that we've noticed with property management is standard forms. So we don't have a lot of commission approved forms for the property managers to use. Typically, you're going to have to go out and get your own leases. You're going to have an attorney draft your property management agreement. The important thing to know is contract documents have to be drafted by a licensed Colorado attorney. You can't use contracts from a California attorney. That's not what the statute allows for. And it's also been discussed at the commission level. We had a lot of property managers that were creating their own contract documents and then having an attorney review them and just having the attorney bless them. That is not acceptable under the statute, and the commission reiterated that. The attorney has to draft the contract, so keep that in mind as well. You are able to use leases provided to you by your landlords. You just need to have documentation in your file that that's where you got that form, and you also need to make sure that you're competent to use it. And I know that my time is running out. I think I've covered everything. So if anybody has any questions, I am more than happy to answer them.
Thanks, Marcia. That's very good information. I do not see any questions that have popped up. So if you have any, now would be the time to post them in the Q&A. That's the only way that we can see them. I've got one that says, what kind of contracts do you mean? I'm not sure what she's specifying, but maybe in referencing to the ones that you have to have drafted by attorneys.
So typically what we see are property management agreements and also leases. And then if you've got addenda to the contracts, those should be drafted by an attorney as well.
Got another one that just came in. As broker owner, does your lease have to be written by an attorney? Yes.
Yes. Well, broker owner. Now, as an owner,
it says
you're then a
owner
principal.
/ yeah, I'm not. I guess I'd need some clarification. So if Rebecca, you could clarify that.
If you're an owner or you're a principal to the transaction, I will warn you though, I have seen over the years instances where brokers who have been principals to the transaction have used something other than like a commission approved form. The commission does hold you to a higher standard as far as practice is concerned. So if Joe Public was to just kind of pull a lease off the internet, it wouldn't be an issue for Joe Public. But for you as a real estate broker, I have seen the commission, and this was a long time ago, penalize somebody for pulling a form off of the internet because it wasn't drafted by an attorney, and it definitely was not a commission approved form. So I would just caution you, because sometimes those agreements can look really slanted to one side of the transaction versus the other. And I think that's when you see the real estate commission kind of really take a stand as far as the consumer protection role that they serve. So
going back to the original, or the question earlier, the gal owns the property and is asking if that lease, her lease on her property, has to be written by an attorney.
I think technically she would fall under the gambit of being a principal, but if it looked predatory, I think the real estate commission could potentially deem you to be either unworthy and incompetent or engaging in dishonest dealings. So just be careful what's in your leases.
Okay. And then, so someone's been using a lease for many years and it was reviewed by attorney. It is not valid unless it has the verbiage, quote, this lease has been prepared by and for. Is that correct? That verbiage needs to be on the form.
Yeah, prepared by a licensed Colorado attorney with the name of the attorney on there, and also who it was prepared for.
Cool. I think that is all the questions that we've got for you, Marcia. I really appreciate your time today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yep, have a great one. Great information. Thank you.
Bye.
Great. So hopefully everybody got that information. Ruth, I can chat with you after the meeting. I just saw your question came through. Or I'm sorry, Daniel mentioned the forms or material coming with this meeting, but I don't see links for it. I'm not sure what that looks like. Maybe Holly can chime in. There should be a part on your screen there, Ruth, that you can access those, but I can help you with that if need be in a little while. Okay, so with that being said, we're going to move on. to the legislative aspect of our forum. So please help me welcome Nate Baumgart. As a partner at Freeman Meyer, Nate is Director of Property and Project Management and oversees all aspects of operation for the company and its investors' assets. Previously, Nate managed over $20 million in multifamily assets in central Denver, as well as working as a senior member of a team responsible for a portfolio of over 350,000 square feet of Class A and B office, retail, and industrial in South Denver. Nate is a member of numerous professional organizations and serves as the chair of the legislative committee for the Colorado chapter of the Institute of Real Estate Management. He is an accredited residential manager, a certified property manager candidate, and a LEAP AP operations and maintenance. And we also have Liz Peetz that will be chiming in. Liz Peetz is the Vice President of Government Affairs at the Colorado Association of Realtors. She has been with CAR since January of 2016. Ms. Peetz directs the public policy efforts of CAR and manages many functions of the Government Affairs Division, but she specializes in policy development, advocacy, and legislative affairs. She also oversees CAR's Legislative Policy Committee and candidate endorsement process through the Colorado Association of Realtors Political Action Committee. Ms. Peetz is a licensed attorney in Colorado, Nebraska, and Washington, D.C., glutton for punishment. Prior to her current position, Ms. Peetz has more than 14 years of experience in government affairs and legal analysis in Washington, D.C. and Colorado. She currently lives in Denver and is very active in the community as a leader for the Young Lawyers section of the American Bar Association. She also serves on the executive boards of the Junior League of Denver and Lift Colorado. We are counting on you to go vote this November in the elections. Liz, Nate?
All right, I should have my screen shared, so I'm gonna, can you guys see my presentation? Just give me like a thumbs up. Just wanna make sure before I start. Perfect, great. And you can hear me? Good, because I bought these airplane cans to make sure people could hear me, so that's important. I sure hope I don't mess up. Liz sounds really impressive. So obviously all this stuff was already here, in case you're wondering. IREM, the Institute of Real Estate Management, is an international organization that certifies property managers. And I am in charge of the Legislative Committee for Colorado. But the only really valuable piece of information on this slide is that my favorite food is tuna melts with avocado. So without insulting your intelligence, I do just want to quickly remind you guys how laws get passed. I think we know less about it on a state and local level than we often think we do. So Colorado has two routes here. One is ballot initiatives, the other is legislators. The ballot initiative in Colorado is one of the easiest and I would say most functional in the United States. It's great. It requires a minimum number of voters in order to place something on a public ballot for people to vote on. So you can see those numbers there of the total number required. It may not seem like much, but in fact, putting things on the ballot can cost several $100,000 when you get down to the number of people, the amount of time, and the sort of careful way in which you have to gather those signatures. I also like to note constitutional changes like the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, which you'll see, Tabor, requires 2% of registered voters in each Senate district. So for instance, you couldn't just gather 125,000 signatures in Denver and put something on the state ballot. Legislators, we have a part-time legislative session, like many do. So January to April, we are in session, but legislation is created year-round. So your state legislators are talking with their constituents, they're putting together legislation all throughout the year. But if you are interested in advocating for something, or you want to talk to them, you really need to do it by October, November, because once we get into December, everything's all set. And that legislative period, January, April, is incredibly intense. A lot of horse trading and going back and forth, seeing what's going to get passed. Obviously, that was really disrupted this year by COVID, which occurred right in the middle of all that. So who is your legislator? If you can answer all four of these questions here, you get a gold star from me. Your city council person, your mayor, your state representative, and your state senator. I know that many of us are very aware of our federal representatives, and obviously there's a lot of chaos happening there right now. But for all of us as citizens, and I believe in particular for real estate people, you are much more impacted by your local government. And that includes your city council person. Your trash, your police, your schools, your property taxes, many times sales taxes, pollution, healthcare, all of these things are much more local than not. And if you don't know who these folks are, then you really should find out. You take one sentence away from this whole presentation, I would say it's this last one here. If you are not communicating with your representatives, I guarantee you someone else is. And my guess is they're probably doing it because they are very, very intensely devoted to some specific issue. So our legislators really need to hear from moderate people who have regular beliefs. If it's your city council person, I guarantee you they'll find time to sit down with you one-on-one and talk with you about about how they're handling stuff and the way they work. So November 2020, what is on the ballot? I want to give a quick plug here for my favorite online resource, which is Ballotpedia. This is a nonpartisan, not-for-profit website devoted to helping you figure out what you're voting on. You can go to this website, you can put in your exact address or perhaps an address for a neighborhood in which you work quite a bit if you focus on a specific geographic area as a realtor. And it'll tell you exactly what's going to be on that ballot, who's going to be on it, what the legislative issues are going to, what the ballot measures are going to be on there. So it's a great resource, especially for folks who don't live in Colorado, who don't get that great ballot packet that we get. This is obviously a really major election year. I think we're all pretty aware of that. There's minimal exact, I would say, platforms that specifically address real estate issues as a very small buttonhole, but there are broader economic policies and ideas of how things work that will affect us. But again, I really think that your local politician is the one who wields the most power on the issues that affect the value of real estate. And they're oftentimes the folks who come into office with the least sort of oversight or investigation. The only major ballot initiative you're going to see that I want to speak to you about today is the Gallagher Amendment repeal. It is not this guy. Gallagher was written back in the 80s, and I'm going to give you an analogy because it can be a very confusing issue. The analogy is going to be going out to lunch. So I want you to imagine about 20 years ago, you and your best friend decided to start going out to lunch. It happened that you spent $45 and your buddy spent $55, which was really expensive back then. You agreed to split the tip, 45% to 55%. And for whatever reason, you decided you were going to keep splitting the tip that way for all your future lunches. Well, you have been doing really, really well with this because as the years have gone by, you have been buying more and more expensive lunches. So you're getting a bottle of champagne and you're getting the surf and turf and the baked Alaska and all that stuff. And you are still only paying 45% of that tip. And the analogy here, the 45% would be single family residential, the 55% would be commercial properties here in Colorado. And what happens is the total amount of money that's going to be collected from assessments leading to property taxes in Colorado is split at that 45 to 55% margin, regardless of that total value of the underlying real estate. So as people have flooded into the Front Range and the value of residential real estate has risen, the overall value of residential real estate is significantly larger than the overall value of commercial real estate, but commercial real estate still has to cover that 55% of the bill. So this leads to a couple of different things. It leads to significantly higher property taxes for commercial, I shouldn't say significantly higher property taxes for commercial properties and very low assessments and property taxes for single family residential. Now, if you're a single family broker, you may very much think this is working out well for you and you want to keep it. And I completely understand that. I would say if you are a multifamily person or you're a leasing agent, this makes it more difficult for apartment buildings to stay afloat. And it also really increases the cost of operating those assets. So you may find yourself on either side of this issue in that regard. One negative that I would say is very significant and definite for everyone is this really creates budget whiplash for communities. So you can imagine if you have a community that is pretty much all residential or very much residential, each year as the assessment floats up and down in order to make sure that property taxes from single family residential only represent 45% of the total money collected, you can see your budget drastically change up and down. And as a result, it really makes it difficult for fire services, for health services, for those local services to figure out what they're going to be able to spend the following year. So I do have a resources document that will be made available. I believe it should be in the documents, but if it's not, we will make sure it's available. And that has a ton of links on it, including a couple of different articles about this and breakdowns on this issue. Obviously, I can understand people would be on multiple sides of it. I myself am very much on the on the positive of repealing it. Something that was not on the ballot, but has been attempted multiple times and actually was, they spent a lot of money to get one on there and didn't get on there this year, is anti-growth initiatives. Measures like this have passed in Golden and Lakewood, and typically the ones we've seen are basically capping housing starts at 1% of the current population. This is essentially, in my opinion, rent control for home ownership. It really benefits current owners at the expense of future residents and citizens. My argument would be that this creates fewer transactions, but much higher price transactions. So if, for instance, you're a leader in luxury market, or you're someone who you know will pull that market share for wherever it is you work, you might want to be in favor of these. But in my opinion, these growth initiatives do the opposite of what we actually need to do, both for ourselves as citizens and also for you as realtors. My opinion is that you want to have as many transactions as possible. You want people to be able to fluidly move from one house to the next. And when houses are sky high in value and people who sell their houses that they've been paying an $800 mortgage on can't buy anything else, they just sit. So it's not to anyone's advantage to decrease density and to basically prevent those transactions from occurring. There are certainly concerns about changes to neighborhoods, and I'll leave those aside. And obviously everyone, again, could find themselves on either side of this issue. One platform that has emerged as we look at the national campaign is Biden has very specifically in clear language promised to eliminate the 1031 exchange on his platform. Now, the extent to which these things happen, the timeline on which they happen, whether Biden or Trump win the election, all that stuff is up in the air. I do want to note that this loophole has been, they've tried to eliminate it a few times in the past, and it was eliminated for a majority of other industries in the 80s and 90s. So this is not a common thing. It is definitely an outlier. And if there is a backlash against real estate or against developers, or however you want to phrase it, with this coming election, I wouldn't be surprised to see this go away. You can find yourself again on both sides of this. I do have a white paper from a couple of economists in the resources section, which has a really nice breakdown of why getting rid of this would be a bad thing. I think it would certainly be a bad thing for realtors, as it would sort of diminish the number of transactions. Although in the short term, leading up to getting put away, you'd have a ton of transactions. So again, just something to keep track of, and again, something you may find yourself on either side of. I did also want to talk about the impact of COVID. We're still waiting to see how this is going to develop, but especially in a state with limits on taxes like the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, state and local budgets have been decimated by the changes, losses in sales tax and other things like that. So there's $1 billion in reductions planned for 2021. That could be as high as 3 times of what was cut in 2008. They're looking at another $3 billion. And a lot of those cuts are going to occur in health and human services and education. That affects things like the homelessness rate. That affects things like your city services. That affects things like school quality. So in the short run, it'll be hard to see what those effects are, but you'll definitely want to keep track of that in terms of your neighborhood, especially if there's one neighborhood you focus in. And again, this is another great reason to be in touch with your local legislators. They are going to be making decisions about who gets money where, and many of those decisions have already been made. So again, as I said before, if you are talking to your rep, I promise you that someone else is. There are a number of state and local resources for tenants who are under stress. There are programs for utility payments, food, rental payments. There are small business loans. Housing Colorado is a great not-for-profit advocacy organization, and on that resources document, I have a link to their page, which has the most comprehensive list of those resources that I've seen. But if you have a tenant and you feel like you have the time or the interest in trying to help them out, you can help them qualify and get engaged in these programs. There is an extended CDC/federal moratorium on evictions. I know it seems very draconian, but from the legal folks that I've spoken to, it's unclear exactly how this is going to play out and when and how it's sort of applying. It's kind of a federal mandate that then has to be executed at a very local level. I would say you should probably expect to have a lot of difficulty and not be able to proceed with any evictions if you have a couple of buildings that you manage, but we're still waiting to see exactly how that plays out and where and when exactly it will end. Finally, I want to remind you that you can help. Huge numbers of local businesses have closed or will close during this period, and food banks are in serious need. Food Bank of the Rockies is a great central place to donate to. They supply a huge network of food banks across the state. If you have a job, you are doing better than many people out there. So please take some time to think about what you can do to help out. This is a really difficult time for everyone. So that is it for me. This is my contact information. If you have any questions or other things, I'd happy to kind of answer them now with Liz, but I'm also happy to get emails or anything later on. That's it.
Great. Oh, that was wonderful information, Nate. So I am just going to go into a little bit about what's going on right now and what we're anticipating next January. And I am also happy to take any questions about the legislative session, but I will leave that for questions if you guys have specifically. First, Nate mentioned that there was a moratorium on the federal level. We are working with our federal political coordinators right now to make sure that our messages as housing providers are taken to Congress so they can actually act to protect both landlords and their tenants. Because we know that more than 40% of rental units across the nation are owned by mom and pop landlords. And we also know that more than 25% of realtors are managing rental property. So we are working very hard to make sure that the next stimulus package includes both sides of that equation. So if you want any talking points from us to communicate to your member of Congress, please reach out. On the local level, Governor Polis did convene a task force on evictions. And we have been in communication with the governor's office, and CAR actually may have a chance to present to the task force for as it goes on. I believe they're meeting about once a week, and we have a colleague that we've been speaking to who's serving on the task force. So please, if you do have things and comments for us to raise with the task force, I highly encourage you funnel those over to us so that we can make sure those property owner and housing provider comments are shared. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is giving you a little bit of a preview of what we think we're going to see in January. I know it sounds crazy that we're already talking January legislative session in September, but yes, it's already happening. So in terms of things that are in the property management landlord tenant space that we think we're going to see, there's probably going to be more bills around HOA fee transparency and potential a dispute resolution process. We're going to see the inclusionary zoning bill come back and potentially some incentives to make sure affordable housing gets built if that goes forward. We also are going to see some legislation around, well, there are drafts, I should say, that are being discussed about using rent or utility payments as a way to determine whether or not someone is creditworthy to get into home ownership. I don't yet know what it'll look like in terms of the housing provider regulations, but there are conversations taking place about that. That fees bill that we saw that was House Bill 1141 that died in committee in 2020, that bill is going to come back in January, and their discussion is revolving around how we align rental payments closer to the mortgage payment schedule, because right now they're light years apart when it's 5th, 8th day versus 15th day. So they're talking about, can we make those closer together so that there's not as much gap? Also, they're looking at standardizing late payments and fees potentially. Of course, we'll care about that and we'll want to have interest in that discussion. And then finally, there's some discussion around using security deposits or payments to cover late payments. And I am encouraged to see that the senators who are discussing this are talking about a way to keep housing providers whole while we protect the tenants. And I think that is the bottom line of what I want to get across to you all that we're doing at CAR and at the national level, is really trying to make sure that we are keeping tenants and housing providers on the same playing field. And that is so important. And that's why we've had a really good ear with Governor Polis, because he understands if we don't tackle the property ownership angle, we'll have a lot of foreclosures on our hands, and those tenants will not be able to rent from all of you housing providers. So with that, I'll stop there, and I'm happy to answer questions about the legislative session or anything that you guys want to ask us.
Liz, there was a question in there about the mill levy.
Yeah, I can take that.
Yeah.
So mill levies are approved by voters locally under Tabor. There are both mill levies and mill levy overrides, and there are special districts and metro districts. I know it's complicated, but we're probably going to see legislation that makes those special taxing districts more transparent to homeowners and property owners. Mill levies are one of the ways we fund schools, and when the voters pass an override, they're exempting it from Tabor, but they're usually attributing it for a specific purpose. So it's not always something that you can just say, oh, it's going to teacher salaries. That's not necessarily the case. It's really attributed to what the voters deem it should go to. The legislature gets to set general fund dollars for education, but the school districts are the ones that determine teacher pay and how that money gets spent. So that's important to keep in mind. But I do think you want to keep an eye out on property taxes, because for every $50 increase in property tax for the property owner, that's about $12,000 in lost purchasing power for a potential new homeowner. And it's also about 12 to 15 months extension of a mortgage. So it does have an impact on property owners, both commercial and residential. So we'll be actually looking at property taxes a lot next session, but that is what mill levies do.
Great, thanks. Couple more in here, and Liz, I think these would probably fall in your realm. For the CDC COVID form for stay of eviction, do they need to be able to testify that all 5 conditions are met? For example, a tenant who's willfully withholding rent, are they eligible for this form?
So it is a self-attestation, which means you self-certify. The enforcement piece of it is a little difficult because there isn't a way to address inadequacies in the program. I think that's probably best taken up with local authorities, but we'll take that one back to NAR and see what they're doing about that, because I don't think the legislation really addresses bad actors in that sense.
Great. And then you had mentioned aligning mortgage payment with the rent payments. We have a request if you could elaborate on what that means.
So we don't know, it's not about the amount of the payments, it's about the date they're due. So normally you get a grace period of like until the 5th or 8th day in a leasing situation, and mortgages are pretty fine set at the 15th day is the day it's due and there's no leeway. They're talking about trying to move those closer together. Obviously some of that aligns or interacts with federal law, so we'll see how far they get with that. But I think the idea is if the rental payments are due closer to the same time the mortgage payments are due, there might be less discrepancy in late payments. But again, it's an ongoing discussion and we'll be interested to see what draft they come up with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is interesting. So you're thinking there may be some potential push towards making rent due later in the month? Is that what I'm, okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Just so that it's closer to the property owner deadlines. But again, it's still an open conversation. I haven't seen the draft of the legislation yet.
Okay. And when that draft comes out, is that something that you'll bring to the members' attention, or is there any way of knowing?
It'll definitely go to our legislative policy committee. You can bet we're going to have an opinion on that one.
Yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't heard that one. Okay. Do you think they will bring the bill that would allow rent control in next year's session?
I do think they're going to bring a bill around rent control. It's a little bit nuanced. It's probably going to be inclusionary zoning and how we change the town of Telluride case. So what we're talking about is trying to work on, if we have to open the door to inclusionary zoning, let's make sure there are incentives listed in there, such as reduced water tap fees or accelerated permitting for affordable housing. Because if we're going to relent on inclusionary zoning, which we don't think has always worked, we want to make sure that the builders and developers who would be required to follow the regulation actually get some benefit out of the legislation. But I don't think you're going to see a strict rent control bill like we saw 2 years ago.
Gotcha. So you're thinking they're going to require some zoning that if you're building in this area, then this must be at a particular rent range. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes they talk about a percentage of units. We don't like that as much because it's a lot more restrictive. We'd like to, it essentially loosens it and allows locals to make their own decisions. We'd like to sort of put parameters and guardrails around that. So locals might be able to consider it, but they should have to undertake a few 5 or 6 things, at least one of them, to make it worthwhile, so that if we're going to open that door, we actually get housing that's affordable built.
Great. Let's see here. I don't believe we have anything else that we haven't hit on. So if you have any other questions, Ruth chimed in, having the rent payments on the 15th of the month, homeowners will struggle to make their mortgage payments on time, and not a big fan of the idea. Thanks, Ruth.
I saw a couple questions in here about
Yeah.
Gallagher.
Yeah.
And I apologize for my fast talking. I just talk really fast. I need to slow down. Again, Gallagher, from my perspective, creates higher rents for businesses, which means we have a lower number of small businesses because of the cost that's involved there. It also increases the cost of goods and services that are provided from those spaces. And so if you are a small business owner, or if you are someone who owns a bunch of retail, for instance, Gallagher is costing you a lot of money. Obviously, like I said, if you're primarily focused either work or home-wise as a single family homeowner, it's definitely keeping your assessments low. And if that's where your voting principles or your opinion lies, and that's how you should vote. And the only thing I would note again is that the primary negative downstream effect is this yo-yoing of local budgets, is because the assessment rate floats with residential in order to produce the right amount of money to match that 55-45 split. You find that, you know, your fire department suddenly has half the funding it had a year ago, and the next year it has twice as much. So for city and local services, it's really difficult to deal with those artificial constraints because they're not related to the present value of the actual real estate that's present in the state. So that's my personal opinion. Obviously, I'm just trying to present both sides, and you know, that's why we all have votes.
Great. Thanks, Nate. One more for you, Liz, if you could, and this goes back to our inclusionary zoning. What is the definition of inclusionary zoning?
Yeah, great question. Inclusionary zoning is one of the tools that municipalities usually have in their toolbox that says we are requiring a certain regulation around what the zoning looks like. So if it's predominantly limited in the new construction phase. So if you are constructing something new, the city could say, you have to use a certain percentage of units that are affordable housing. And so maybe they have to be below market rate if you build. The reason that we've had difficulty with inclusionary zoning in the past is we have seen, well-intended, it is not always good at resulting in good building. It just moves the building to another area that doesn't have as many restrictions in a different part of the state. We think it's better to partner with the developers in the city up front rather than put more regulations. We know that 24% of building is due to compliance with regulations. So adding more doesn't necessarily help us get more product built, because as we all know, there's not enough supply for anyone across our entire state.
Awesome. Thank you. Ben is asking for evictions. What if the lease ends and tenants don't leave?
So I think that is a question we're continuing to try to address. What has been raised in a lot of conversations are repayment agreements. It was brought up during the 2020 session as a potential solution to some of the moratorium policy that was being brought forward. The difficulty with that is, while you could add a repayment program onto a lease, and maybe extend the lease and spread that cost out over the course of many months, if you have a tenant who literally can't pay that extra amount, it might be judgment proof. So it's not the best solution. It's better than nothing, but I think we still have a problem with that. If they are not leaving, then whenever this moratorium period ends, there will be an eviction process that will continue. Question will be how far backed up the courts are in terms of how that process is going to iron out. I think that's why you're seeing us and NAR advocate for rental assistance payments that go directly to the housing provider on behalf of the tenants, because we need to have those housing providers treated the same as the renters.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, I think that finishes up our question for the legislative portion. Nate, really appreciate it. Liz, thanks a bunch. We will move on now to our panel. All right, so from there, if you all would help me welcome the panel for the last part of today's session. We have Alex Yoder. He's an owner-operator at Dorman Real Estate Management. It's a property management firm with over 750 doors based out of Colorado Springs. He's a master property management designation holder and has been professionally managing real estate since 2005. Mr. Yoder is a past president of the Colorado Springs chapter of the National Association of Residential Property Managers. He's also the present chair of the Council of Elite Property Managers and be the 2021 Colorado Springs NARPM Legislative Chair. He has served in many other board roles, positions in real estate and property management associations, and has published several articles on real estate management in national publications. And it keeps going. If you were bored, it's not done yet. Mr. Yoder was featured in 2018 on the Real Estate Titans podcast and runs and moderates the Colorado Springs Landlord Forum Facebook group. Go check it out if you're not a part of it. It's a great deal. He is passionate about legislative involvement, fighting for private property owner and landlord rights, and has been heavily involved in coordinating and testifying for and against legislation at the state and local level, which I get to personally experience because he's a colleague of mine in my market area, and what he has done single-handedly with some other property managers is very impressive for the industry. So kudos, my friend. We also have Larry Mallard. He is the CEO and managing partner of Alpine Lodging and Sea2 Ski Properties in Telluride, Colorado. Very beautiful part of the state. Larry is a native of Oklahoma and has lived in Colorado for the past 24 years. He specializes in developing and managing business models that can be successful in seasonal and remote tourist destinations. Specific areas of expertise are vacation rentals, property management, HOA management, private residence / fractional clubs, luxury boutique hotels, and golf resort management. Larry, welcome. Linda Romer-Todd has been in real estate since 1978. She has been the sole owner of Associated Brokers and Consultants, Inc. until January 2020 when she sold her interests. Congratulations, I think, Linda. Linda continues to work as a realtor for the company. ABC lists and sells as well as manages 280 units for clients. The portfolio or property management portfolio includes single family homes, multifamily properties from duplexes to 12plexes, and small commercial units. Linda is a NAR RPAC Hall of Fame investor. Go Linda, thank you. That's huge for our industry, really appreciate it. Linda has served as her local association president twice, has served on multiple NAR committees and work groups, and has been very active participant on CAR committees. Huge contribution to the industry, thank you. Mark Cunningham. Grew up in the real estate world and spent many years pulling weeds, painting walls, showing properties, and collecting rents for Grace Property Management, the company his father founded. He's probably still doing those things today, right, Mark? Today from a platform of managing over 900 rental properties with 20 plus team members. Congratulations. Grace Management helps people buy, sell, invest, flip, collect rent, evict, and have fun. That's not a word you hear a lot in property management, but Mark has managed to make that happen. If you're more impressed with the initials after his name, Mark's got a lot of them. He's the president of Grace Property Management and Real Estate. He holds a degree in real estate and finance. He has taught CE classes in over 20 states, which go check one out if you haven't. He is a great instructor. Is regularly featured in national real estate publications and podcasts, holds multiple designations, invests in residential and commercial real estate, and was named the 28th National Property Manager of the Year by Think Realty. Congratulations, my friend, and welcome to all of you. We appreciate your time today. So to start, can each of you please share with us your property management market? We'll go Linda, then Mark, Alex, then Larry.
Do you mean like, are we good or not, or what we have?
Just where are you in the state? I know we touched on Telluride. Okay. For Larry, I gave a little divulgence that Alex was in my area.
We're in Grand Junction. We manage properties within Mesa County from Fruta to Palisade.
Great. Mark?
Yeah, we're in the Metro Denver area. So we go kind of from Tech Center up to northern Colorado area.
Awesome. Alex?
So we're in Colorado Springs. We go Castle Rock to Falcon to Pueblo to Cripple Creek.
Awesome. And Larry?
As you said, we're in Telluride. We also have some locations in Park City, Utah, and Sun Valley, Idaho.
Great. Okay, Larry, Linda, I'm going to start with you. How's the recent crisis with COVID-19 affected your business?
Well, the disease, I don't think, has affected us as much as the regulations that have been imposed upon us have affected us. The contracts that we do with our owners, that whether they have one property or multiple properties, determines the fee that we might charge and then what we offer for that fee. Some of the regulations that came down have basically chopped us off at the knees and the incomes that we might receive because with them saying someone doesn't have to pay rent, that takes out a property management fee. If they can only have to pay $20 in late fees, and then that cuts out a fee that many managers would receive. So whether or not we can evict them when they're not paying, they're looking at riding the horse for 4 or 5 months sometimes, and even having a court case just this last week for our firm that the tenant filed back for non-habitable because she failed to pay her water bill and didn't have water. So even though she tells the judge she's got money and she could have paid, but she didn't. And it's just created a lot of havoc with the regulations coming down that we struggle as managers trying to stay up with them of what we can legally do and what we cannot. But I'm sure it's confusing for the tenants of knowing what they have to do and what they do not.
Thank you. Larry?
It's kind of a two-sided coin on how it's affected us here in Telluride in the Mountain Village area. Obviously, when Governor Polis closed the ski areas in all of Colorado on March 15th, our near-term business was decimated immediately. Those middle 2 weeks and third week of March for our business are upwards of 5% of our annual income because of the Texas and Arizona spring break weeks. It's just a big area these guys come to. Following that, our county went ahead and did a little more than what the state did and closed all of lodging. Nothing was open for any reason whatsoever for the remainder of March, all of May, all of April, and most of June. So beginning July 1st, we were allowed to go to 50% occupancy and have been allowed to run that way through the entire summer. And beginning on October 1st, we're going to go to 75% occupancy. So being restricted to that limited number of people coming in was one thing, but there has been a relative silver lining for us in the sense that we've never seen the demand to want to come to a place like Telluride like it is right now. People are trying to get to locations like this because you can organically socially distance. There's not a whole lot going on, the crisp, clean mountain area, the whole thing. And it's allowed us to do a fairly substantial increase in rate. So for the majority of lodgers, at least the people in my business in this area, the second half of the year, the third and fourth quarter of the year are going to be flat, if not a little up than what people are used to just because of the demand that it was to come here. So early on, we dug a very big hole, and those last 2 quarters of the year, while they're looking as good or better than last year, they're not going to make it up. But we're fairly bullish that at least right now, there's an appetite to come to these remote destinations that we have in Colorado and want to spend time here as opposed to a city.
Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. Sorry you have to experience that with everybody else. It's kind of, this is why you own a business and work in it, right, Larry? Because you're like, this is the thing that I like to figure out on a daily basis.
Well, I don't know about that, but yes, yeah.
Yeah, good deal. Okay, next question is for Mark and Alex. Before the crisis, did you have any practices in place to protect your business that you would recommend, and what are they?
So before the crisis started to come down, one thing we had really been focusing on is how to let our team work remotely, how to work online, work from the comfort of our home offices before we knew we had to. So that was very fortunate for us. But what that meant logistically is we put a lot of things in place for the benefit of our tenants, so where they didn't need to come into our office, because right now they can't come into our office. So little things like the ability for tenants to pay online, like for them to be able to submit repair requests online, do everything remotely online. Those things ended up just being tremendously valuable so that our operations didn't miss too much of a beat as related to our current residents. And as it related to new incoming residents, you know, one challenge we've had as an industry is leasing. How do you lease a vacant property when nobody can see each other? So that idea of taking the vacant properties that we have as an industry have and advertising them online through videos, allowing electronic unassisted tours, video tours, that's been a trend in our industry. Really what I think we've seen is we've seen all these trends just accelerate through the COVID.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Alex.
Yeah, we didn't prepare to work from home like Mark did beforehand, so we were scrambling a little bit with that, but we definitely got through it pretty quickly. In terms of things that we did prior to that positioned us well, I'm going to speak a little bit more on self-show that Mark just touched on. We've been doing self-show on properties for about 12 years now, and it's definitely more of a trend now in the last couple of years. Although you see it more if you go to like national broker conferences, you know, you're seeing like, you know, almost everybody in the room raise their hand that they do that, but a lot of people in my market in Colorado Springs don't. I think if I had to guess, probably 30 or 40% do, maybe less, but the majority still do guided tours. A lot of those people were stuck scrambling or converting after COVID hit, but having that already in place was really nice because we were already positioned to market those and allow for showings. And of course, as regulations change when it comes to sanitizing and that kind of stuff, we still are adapting on a daily basis to figure out how best to do that. But at least we're able to continue having traffic go through properties. The other thing is, it would be my advice, and you need to speak with your attorneys as you're evaluating your property management agreement and the way that you've set that up. Because sometimes when we're in situations like we just were with, and we still are with COVID, you somewhat have to be nimble with the way that you've positioned your contract. And one really big thing that I've done for many years, and I think Mark does the same thing, and many other of the larger companies, is that we are in a position to make adjustments or amendments to our contract upon notice. I would speak with your attorney about the language for that, and they can give you advice about kind of DORA's interpretation as well. But being in a position to where we can say, we need to make these changes really quickly to make sure that we're still going to get paid is pretty important. And one thing that should definitely be in your PMA, in my opinion, is that you get paid your management fee if there's a tenant in place, regardless of whether they pay or not. Previously, that didn't matter, right? Because we would just, okay, I'm not getting it right now, but when I do the deposit reconciliation or when they do pay, I'll pay myself back. Well, if they're 3, 4, 5, 6 months behind, that sort of changes that picture. So being able to charge a management fee, stay in business, and early on, we didn't know how big of an impact this would be, right? You know, for all we knew, we'd be getting no rent for 6 months on half our properties. Early on, we had no idea what was going to happen. And so knowing that you're going to get your management fee, you can still stay in that gap for your property owner, in my opinion, is very important.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned self-show, because back in the day, like 1980 style and 1970 style, that was what everybody did with self-show. Like you'd come in, license, key, see it by, they'd bring the key back, and there was this huge migration towards, you know, we're only showing properties in person, and now there's I guess a more technologically advanced method of self-show. So that's interesting stuff.
And let me speak to that really quick. I'm sorry, yeah. Daniel, but
no, please do.
I think it's worth mentioning that the commission did have a special meeting about self-show because there was kind of this lingering concern that the commission would say that you were negligent as an agent allowing somebody to go through the property by themselves. And it has been confirmed by the commission that this is acceptable practice. Now, there are reasonable things that you are doing to position the property and your owner to not have problems, like using one of these software programs like ShowMojo or Tenant Turner or any number of those programs that really do a good job with pre-screening. There's GPS stuff, so they can't get in the box unless the confirmed cell phone is near the box and all this kind of stuff. So if you're not doing that, I would advise looking into it.
Awesome, thanks. Okay, moving on. This question is for Larry and Mark. Can you discuss how you adjusted your customer-facing processes to adapt to these unique times? And Mark, I'm going to have you jump in first just because you briefly mentioned this in the first question, and then Larry will jump over to you.
Yeah, the biggest thing is kind of what Alex was just talking about, that idea of letting tenants self-show. You mentioned, Daniel, going way back when, that was the standard. And then we went through a period of time where it was just frowned upon as an industry, and especially as it related to sales. I mean, you don't do that on the sales side. And now we've come full circle from a convenience standpoint, from a safety standpoint of the agents, and from a convenience. And I would piggyback on everything Alex just said there. If that's something that you know, our folks watching are interested in, boy, check that out. That's going to be a game changer for our industry from that side of things. Inspections was something else that we had to learn real quickly how we were going to do. And what by inspections, I mean like occupied property inspections. You know, the tenant's been in there for 6 months, and we want to go in and do a walkthrough inspection, and how should that work? So we had to give some leeway there and pause those for a period of time, make sure that the folks going in are wearing the masks and properly vetted and all that good stuff, and cleaning, and pause that and turn that back on. There's been almost another new trend popping up in our industry where we've seen some companies say, hey, have the tenant do their own inspections. You know, have them take their phone, walk through and record everything. And I don't know, that's you can make an argument for or against. It's interesting. So there's a lot of transitions with that. And then the last big component for us that we were able to continue on with our tenants and residents that way is with the online payment. You know, so if that's not something that you're offering, gosh, it's time to do that. Not just from a convenience factor, but from a necessity factor anymore. Tenants expect it. It takes away all the lost checks, and it's in the mail, and I slid it under the door, and it's very easy to administer today. And that's something that I think everybody should be tracking. You know, we've been tracking that, and we're to the point now that we've got over 90% of our tenants paying their rent online. So that's a lot of checks we don't have to account for every month, but that's been the other big part for us.
Yeah, and question actually that leads well into a question I have. What is the online payment system that you use? Do you do it through your property management software? Do you use a third-party software to receive those rent payments?
Yeah, good question. So it's through our software. Most of the major software players out there have that as a built-in type of a thing. So whether you're using AppFolio or Propertyware or Rentvine or QuickBooks, almost all of those have that online payment option. It's just part of the software from an accounting standpoint. If you don't use any software that way, there are some third-party providers that can kind of piggyback onto that as well. Their name escapes me. We can go back and provide that.
Yeah.
But anymore, it's really necessary for those tenants, and a huge convenience for us as the PM companies as well.
Awesome. Thanks. Larry, how about you, my friend?
Well, ours is just a little bit different because we're in the hotel management, motel management, and then vacation rental piece. So just for example, in the Telluride Mountain Village area, managing 400 or 500 units, our interactions with guests daily are in the thousands traditionally in seasons. So very, very difficult for us to get our arms around how to do that. So it changed from the pre-arrival communication piece where we try to explain everything in advance to the guest when they get here, as opposed to meeting them in person at our office or checking them on a property. We send them there with a code to get in. Hopefully everything is in there, and doing so many things such as property tours virtually like you guys were talking about. But we can't even now do daily housekeeping with guests in the room. We can't do maintenance services with guests in the room. So just getting some of these guests retrained on the fact that a lot of these things that we do as a company, we do need to do away from them and without any interaction. And the most difficult part of that is probably the higher touch properties, the 4- and 5-star hotel type property. Those types of products kind of made their living on high touch and engaging these guests. So trying to get everybody to do things more virtually, just in-unit check-ins, no housekeeping while they're in the unit, in-unit check-outs, and those types of things are what we've really tried to do. But it even gets further down into trying to manage it at the pools and in the elevators and the stairwells and all of that. So from our perspective, trying to minimize the guest interaction amongst the guests themselves and then amongst our staff has been one of the bigger challenges for us, at least in our discipline.
And what are some things, like, have you had to adopt new software, Larry, or has your existing software created some additional usages that you were able to tap into? Just one or two brief examples of, maybe what you were doing and then you are doing, and if that was just something that was already provided or what.
So fortunately, what we were on, our software already had some modules that helped with that, such as an online check-in contract where you would check all the boxes that say, I agree to the terms and conditions and all of that. So we had the ability to do that. The only thing we added was a COVID certified training program for our housekeeping departments. that was put on. So we did purchase that from another company where all of our staff are required to be certified that they know all of the specifics about cleaning for COVID. But outside of that, we were able to use the modules that were within inside our PMS now.
Pretty impressive. Thank you. Okay, Linda, Alex, this one's for you. What about your internal processes? Did you make adjustments to your internal processes? If so, what were they?
Number one, about the middle of March, we locked our front door, which was really hard for us because we're mom and pop level. We really liked being able to talk to our tenants, got to know them better. When things would go awry, it was much easier to communicate with them because we had a little personal touch with them. Fortunately, our company had changed software for our property management January 1, so a much more accelerated portal convenience for our tenants and for our landlords. So we were kind of ahead of the game on that. We've always done individual review of properties. We've not accompanied people to the properties. That's always been our standard. But we do require them to see the property before we sign a lease. But they're approved with the process. Since we don't allow them in the office, with rare exception, I guess they might be sitting in their car in front of our office and we're going through the lease paragraph by paragraph by telephone. It's become onerous. Actually, the sad side is we don't really get to know the tenant, and I think that was an important part of our business, and we hope that we get back to that somehow. The majority are now paying on rent, sending their maintenance issues in on the portal like this, but there are some, we have a lot of cash payers and they want to come put it in our Dropbox. That some of them want to count it out to us as they stand with their mask on at our door. But we're looking forward to being open arms again.
Great, thank you. Alex?
So we made quite a few changes to adapt. We already had about 95% of our tenants paying online. And we of course have a Dropbox. So the biggest thing was, and really the only time we ever saw our tenants was when they were picking up keys and dropping the keys off. So we had some minor changes with the key pickup process, and then the kind of key return Dropbox process. But that wasn't a huge deal. I think the biggest thing for us is that, we have a team of about 14 people and we have checklists for about everything that we do. And we're kind of semi old school in that we've been using kind of printed out paper checklists that have worked really well. But in this age where we're all pretty much working from home and half of us don't even have printers, that doesn't really work. So we sort of had to expedite setting up digital checklists, which we've done, and it's phenomenal. It does take time to get those things in place though. So we were scrambling for a couple of weeks to get things in place. Beyond that, we are doing tenant completed renewals. Usually we would do a accompanied walkthrough and take pictures of each room just to give the owner some peace of mind that their house wasn't being destroyed at the time that we were renewing their lease. We've converted now to tenants doing their own renewal walkthrough photos, which we will still forward to the homeowner after those are completed. We're of course not doing, well, not of course, but we're not doing any occupied showings unless it's a lease break because of the obligation to mitigate damages and try to secure a new tenant in those cases. But for the most part, we're only doing vacant self-show on our properties. I guess beyond that, we're thinking outside the box. Things like cash for keys all of a sudden makes a lot more sense than it used to, with the very difficult challenge of actually removing people for non-payment. And we're of course more flexible than ever with payment arrangements and trying to make things work. So.
Great, thanks. Question about your forms, actually. Did you internally create your checklists from paper to electronic, or did you use, a resource, a company to do that for you?
At this point, we've done it internally, and it works. It could be better, but it works. And we're looking at some other programs because the one that we have is really good for forms, but not so great for checklists. So again, it works, but we're not really designed for checklists. So we're looking to make some changes on the software side with that. There are companies that do these things for you and set up automation for you. And at this point, we haven't bitten a bullet on that. Many of them are 10, 15 grand just to get started. So we have not jumped on that yet, but we've found that doing them internally works okay. You just have to set aside the time.
Excellent, thanks. And for anybody in the group, don't forget, if you have questions, go ahead and submit those still, and we'll answer them throughout this or at the end. The next question I have is for Alex and Larry. Were there any changes that you made to your business practices to adapt that you now prefer and will continue to implement going forward? Larry, why don't you jump in?
On ours, I would say it's kind of twofold. The changes we made on the operational side might be driven more by guest demand and what the guest wants to see when we change back. Certainly by eliminating a lot of the guest contact and a lot of the things that we were doing on a regular basis, there is an inherent expense savings with those, which we're glad are there because there was reduced revenue obviously associated with that. However, if there are ways to make the operation more efficient from a cost standpoint going forward, we'll continue to do that. If there are things that we've eliminated or we no longer do that by guest demand requires us to start doing that to stay competitive, we would. But there are some more efficient ways, literally, that have been discovered by doing some of this. And if that's acceptable to the guests going forward, I would say we would continue that. Related to the administrative side, we were, by our public health order in our county, not allowed to have non-essential people come to work. They had to work from home. And that would be the sales staff, marketing staff, any administrative staff, human resources, IT, you know, those kind of things. And to our surprise and enjoyment, we found that the folks that are there, we've surveyed them just as recently as last week, they're enjoying the work-life balance more of working from home. And we've seen actually an increase in productivity, which was something we weren't really expecting. So I really, from an administrative, sales, marketing, those types of standpoints, I don't know that I ever envision again, at least Alpine Lodging, having those types of people in an office 5 days a week all together. We're going to refine this work from home model, but it seems to have been something that is enjoyed by our staff more. And that's great because they're being even more productive than they ever have. So I think the work from home model for us is something that will really carry you know, that's because, again, if I don't have to have 2 Main Street offices and I only have to have 1, there's that inherent cost savings as well. So yeah, I think operationally, we're going to have to let the guests determine what we continue to do and what we don't do. But from an administrative side, I suspect that the work from home model will be a way we continue.
And have you seen a demand change in what your customers are looking for through this, things that you used to do that they miss? Obviously, that's still yet to be determined. Or things that you're doing now that they maybe, you know, like or don't like? Is that something you've been able to track yet?
I think we're still early enough in this pandemic and everything's still unknown that everyone is very understanding. If you have cut a service, they're very understanding with it. What the temperature of that is, how long that continues to go, I think will be determinant. The higher end product, the ones that are paying, you know, $1,000 a night for a hotel room type product, there are just certain things that they're going to expect for that. And they're willing to take no for an answer right now because of COVID. But I suspect some of those will be demanded to be back and will need to be done, but probably at a safer, more hygienic level than ever before. But I do think there's going to be some demand that we have to do just because people are paying for that service.
Great, good information. Alex, how about you, my friend?
So yeah, we're going to, of course, stick with these digital checklists and expand that. Really, probably the only other major thing I think that we're probably going to stick with is kind of what Larry was saying, which is a little bit more flexibility on the work from home situation. And you know, there are many companies that function very well, 100% working from home, and I don't fault that at all. However, me and my partner have more of a preference, just kind of from a teamwork building angle, kind of prefer to be in the office with folks, but this definitely has opened our eyes. I mean, we went from nobody working from home pretty much ever to everyone being home within like a 1 week time frame. So kind of forced us to think outside the box, think outside what we used to be comfortable with. And I think we're going to have a lot more flexibility with certainly our property managers and possibly other positions going forward to work from home. And I'm not sure what it's going to look like yet for our company, but we're much more open to it now than we were before. Beyond that, most of the other changes, we're going back to how we were before. We're going to eventually continue to do occupied showings. We're going to go back to doing our own renewal walkthroughs, and so many of those other changes we're returning to the previous way of doing things. But there definitely is some positive outcome forcing you to think outside what you used to be comfortable with, certainly with the work from home situation for us. So,
Absolutely. Great. So moving on, Mark and Alex, this question's for you. In what ways are you helping to support your tenants who may be struggling? I assume you guys are just personally stroking checks for every rent payment that can't be made right now, right? Like every good property manager should.
Hey, Daniel, to call you out, we actually have written a few.
Attaboy, Mark. I knew I could count on you.
Not many, but a few to help out. You know, from a big perspective, I think nobody knew what was going to happen, right? As an industry, we were like, when this COVID stuff started happening, it was, okay, is the world over? Is every tenant in the history of the world going to stop paying rent? And we just have mass flooding out the gate? What's going to happen? And I think as an industry, we've been pleasantly surprised. By and large, most tenants from PMs I've talked to locally, nationally, people are still paying the rent. But I think what we have seen on average is it's taking people longer. So what used to be a 5-day collection period, you know, rent's due on the 1st, we count all of our money on the 5th, and we have 95% in, right? I mean, roughly. Well, now rent's due on the 1st, we work till the 30th, the end of the month, and then we've got maybe 94% in. So it's extending the time frame to collect, but what we've seen by and large is we're still collecting that same amount of rent that's due. It's just taking longer. With the new CDC ruling, which is in essence paused evictions till the end of the year, till the 1st of next year. I think next month, October, I think it's a pivotal month for us as an industry because this ruling just went into effect. And if you're a tenant sitting there thinking, do I want to take advantage of this? Well, if you're going to take advantage of it, you're going to take advantage of it now, meaning October. That's the first month you can really sit there and not pay for 3 months. So if we can get through October, then I think we'll see by the time we hit November and December, tenants saying, well, I got to pay in January anyway if I want to stick around. I don't want to dig myself too deep a hole and pay. So we've been fortunate. What we've done internally is we've blown our standard practices out the window with rents due on the 1st. We can set a payment arrangement with you, but here are the terms, and our notice goes out on this date, and very, very strict terms for collections and payment arrangements. We've had to just expand that to say, hey, what can you do? You can pay on the 25th. Great. We'll see you on the 25th, hopefully. Right? The power's in the hands of the tenants right now. And so this is when it's so important for us to have strong relationships with our tenants so we can depend on those relationships and lean into that to make payment arrangements that are going to be workable for them, whatever that payment arrangement looks like. We've been very proactive in waiving late fees from the early days before we had to. Why? Because we think it's the right thing to do. We want to help our tenants as much as possible, and good folks are impacted by this. We, of course, want to share with all of our tenants the resources they can have through the state, the federal government to have payment assistance. And about a year and a half ago, I mentioned, so we actually started an internal fund. We call it our Grace Gives Fund, where every month, every time we sign a lease, we put some money for that lease into a fund that we use to help tenants in need, because everybody gets in a tough position at some point in time. Right? So we have written a few checks, and that's been cool that we can step up and do that. But those are the things we put in place. We're counting the days down, man. I mean, I can't wait till we hit 2021. I've never been so glad to see a year end. And but by and large, I talked to a property manager in California a few weeks ago. In California, you know, we think we're bad. They don't have to pay rent whatsoever. They haven't had to in the longest time. And he said when these rulings came down, he said, I was terrified. I was terrified my tenants would just clam up and stop paying. And I said, well, what happened? He said, you know what? This has restored my faith in humanity. He said, because by and large, my tenants are still paying. They don't have to, but they are. And I think that's the consensus from what I've seen overall, that most tenants are good folks. They want to pay, and we want to help them when we can.
Yeah, absolutely. Alex.
Yeah, I'm going to second a lot of that. Obviously, a lot more flexibility in payment arrangements. And as Mark said, we've seen a very small increase in delinquency. We didn't know what to expect originally. I think it was originally like 2 or 3% increase, but now it's like 0.1%. I think we have like one guy who hasn't paid that we're trying to work out cash for keys on. But you know, for the ones that didn't pay originally, we're again just very flexible with payments. Some of them we spread out what was due, what was unpaid over the course of several months, which we wouldn't usually do. So yeah, lots of flexibility there. I think beyond that, I think it's important to point out that this is the time, probably more than ever than we may see in our lifetime, to show tenants that we care. You know, we're not just here to make money. That's part of it, but we're not just here to make money. And what better time to show the community and to rewrite the narrative here a little bit, in that landlords do actually care. And so one of the things, I'll brag about our group here for just a minute. One of the things that we did was and it's not a huge thing, but it's something. And we got on the news, which was kind of cool. But we bought free pizza for our tenants. We had an open budget for 4 days. The first couple of days, I think it was May. And so we bought a bunch of pizza for people. And again, nothing, it's not huge. And you could do anything, but I think it'd be, I'd like to encourage folks to look for opportunities to show the community that landlords do actually care. And if there's some way that you can do that in a way that specifically targets tenants, and doesn't have to be just your tenants, it can be all tenants, I would encourage folks to look for those opportunities.
Excellent. Yeah, I didn't get the invite for that pizza, so
I'd encourage Alex to buy my tenant's pizza. Actually, mine, not all.
I love that, Alex. He's a good dude, isn't he? All right, last question, Larry and Linda. Last question of my formal questions, then we'll jump over into the informal questions. Do you have any policies you are putting into place to prepare for a future crisis situation? As much as we are looking forward to navigating these waters again in the future, I assume you guys have jumped right at some policies you can refer back to, right, Linda?
Oh, number one, we always have to say we work for the landlord. We work for the owners of these properties, and first and foremost, our job is to collect the rent and protect their property. That being said, we have always had a workable solution for someone who just ended up in a short bind and needed some help working their way through. And most of our owners would say, yeah, we can work with a payment plan such as they referred to. That is still in place. But I just went back to Alex's note. Because we have owners that unfortunately end up being a landlord and they can't make their payment. And so their credits are being destroyed during this time period that somebody cannot or is not paying rent. So we have to deal with that. But for policies that we have put in place and working with our owners, unfortunately, it doesn't help with the affordable housing because we're increasing by twofold our deposits that we're requiring, because when we have found through that 5% that doesn't pay, and again 95% probably do, is that the longer they're in the property without paying, the more damage is done to that apartment. That just seems to roll with a lot of it. So when you're talking, $5,000 to $8,000 on an average turning over to fix an apartment, we need to protect our owners with more deposit. And yeah, you don't know that until they move in as to what you're going to require.
So that's one of the policies that you're working on, is just going forward, any of these types of things, you're going to be requiring more security deposits.
Yes.
Yeah. Cool. Larry, how about you?
Our model's a little bit unique compared to most people on this phone because we're in a real seasonal area that doesn't have the 12-month consistent. While we have about 50 long-term rental products, our primary focus is more on the short-term piece. Because we've been around for 26 years, we went through 9/11, we went through the 08-09 financial crisis, we went through wildfires in 16 and 17. So we've been through some of these economic crises before. This one was amplified, obviously, because it was a health crisis on top of an economic crisis, which has just complicated the heck out of it for all of us. But we just decided to develop, and would recommend anybody develop, and I would assume most people do, different austerity measure tiers that you can enact quickly if these kind of things happen. And we have a little over 100 employees, of which 60 to 70 we lay off twice a year already through job attached unemployment, because we get about 90% of our income in Telluride over a 5 or 6 month period. So I would just recommend people looking at these tiers of austerity measures. Our tier one's pretty simple. It's just stopping non-essential expense payments, freezing of any raises or hiring. You go to tier two where things may start to get cut, but tier three is more of a survivability for your company mode. And we've developed those over the years. We're not afraid to enact them real quick. I would say we've enacted tier one of our austerity measures half a dozen times in the last decade because of various things that have happened. But The policies that we had in place, we've refined, but again, just trying to make sure you have some austerity measures in place to react quickly on the expense side when your income side is hit quickly.
Excellent.
Hey, can I just double down on what Larry said there? I mean, I
Yeah,
think that is
please
so
do.
important, right?
Mm-hmm.
As business owners, that's what most of us are here. That idea that now more than most times it is just essential to cut the unnecessary costs. I mean, what a great reminder for all of us that there are those times, and now's one of them, where you've got to focus your money and allocate your resources on things that are necessary. And if it's not necessary, and for most of us, we certainly found that when we really dig in, there's a lot of stuff that's not necessary. I'm not even talking people that we have. I don't mean that's the last, that'd be tier 3 for us, Larry, or people, right? But those things, those subscriptions, those things that you signed up for that they charge your card every month, all these things that we just add on, we've got to be lean. You've got to be lean right now. And that's been a lifesaver for us.
Yep, excellent. Good point. Cool. So we've got a couple of questions. I would encourage any of the listeners to post their questions in that Q&A section, and we will address those now. First question that I have is, are there any suggestions for programs, apps, or websites to house the digital checklists, even if they create internally, just a place to keep them where everyone has access? Alex, you may be a good resource for that.
I would recommend Process Street. There are several, and we are currently looking at Process Street. So I haven't come to a conclusion about which one we're using, but there are several Facebook groups that are specific to property management. And there are many companies using these kinds of checklists. That would be a really good place to start to get some feedback on a couple different options. And then I would play with each of them. Now, what's hard, it's kind of like property management software. Some of them are more user-friendly, but are not quite as robust, and vice versa. So you want to see what works for you, sort of for your skill set. I mean, some of them that I think I downloaded one called, is it Podio?
Yeah, I think so.
Sound right to you guys? And I mean, I wouldn't say I'm amazing with tech and this kind of stuff, but I'm pretty decent at it, and my brain hurt pretty quickly. So some of these are maybe way over your or my head. And so you want to get a comfort level, but they're not all that way. Some of them are, again, not very robust, but are very user-friendly. So look into those different options.
Excellent. Anybody else want to jump in on that one?
This is Larry. I can chime in that. Oh, sorry, Mark, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we're still pretty old school. We use a lot of paper checklists. It's gotten us to where we are. What we've done is we've taken a lot of those checklists and just put them online through like OneDrive. Right. So it's still the document. It's just that the document lives on OneDrive. So you log in, you check it off, you check off the paper, what you're looking at on the paper there on OneDrive, you click save, the next person goes in. So I always encourage people, don't fall in love with the online version. You know, I mean, it doesn't matter what process you use online. The point is, how good is your process, right? Make your checklist tight, whether you do it on paper format, whether it's an Excel, whether it's something in your hand or whether you upload it, that's secondary. But get the process tight, then figure out how you're going to follow it.
Thanks. Larry?
We've downloaded last year and started using something called Easy Inspect, and we picked it primarily because it interfaced with our PMS. It's been more than adequate for us. It was a relatively cheap solution. The only downside we've seen so far is it's rather labor intensive to load. Each property has to be loaded individually, and it's a 4 or 5 hour process. So if you've got hundreds of properties, it's a pretty big task, but we've had good luck with it. Easy Inspect.
Excellent. We've only got one.
Let me add to that real quick. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Kind of playing off what Mark said. If you have just a basic PDF editor, you can set these checklists, your paper checklists up with check boxes. So you can actually check those boxes digitally, and that works okay too. You don't have to do, like he was saying, you don't have to pay for or do one of these more, advanced online ways of setting those up. That in my opinion is nice to have, but not a necessity.
Cool. We'll do 2 more questions and then we'll jump off here.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Linda.
Okay. Yeah, I would just like, for everybody listening, if you know somebody that sits on our state ledge committee, or talk with the CAR staff like this, it is so important that we stay on these topics as they move through the legislature, or they even hear a draft being put together, because there's some legislation that could drastically change the way that we have been doing things, or we'll be able to do things in the future.
Yep. Great. Are you still posting for evictions when needed?
We post for evictions just about every month. And unfortunately, our postings go to the same people month after month after month.
Yeah. Great. All right. I've got sort of a long one here, Jay. I'm going to throw it out there. Jay is the individual asking the question. As a property management company, they have significantly changed their qualifying criteria and screening process in response to the moratoriums, et cetera. Have any of you made any changes to your qualifications or your screening process due to these things? Yes or no? No.
We have not yet.
No. Cool.
I don't think a 0.1% increase in our delinquency warrants a change to our screening process.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
I think if someone's looking at their delinquency and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm 25% delinquent. I think what that really shows is your screening process was not real well run. It was broken before, right? Mm-hmm. So I think what is going on has revealed for a lot of us how good our screening process was previously. Mm-hmm. If Alex just said he's got a 1% delinquency, that tells me Alex's screening process is pretty tight. So this is a great test for us, right? COVID is a great test. It's a stress test for our businesses to see how well we're set up to handle these things.
Yeah, everything is.
Correction, that is 0.1, Mark.
Oh, 0.1. Sorry, Alex.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is, we've had our time and our fun. We're going to wrap up the Q&A. Just wanted to say thank you to everybody, the presenters and panelists, Lisa, Holly, for getting this put together at Colorado Association of Realtors. Don't forget there's a handout in the download section, resources section of this. I think this was being recorded, so they may be sending it out. However, I don't have that information immediately available. But if you want it, you may reach out to Holly or Lisa at Colorado Association of Realtors. I appreciate everybody that joined us for the forum. I hope you've learned something from all of our panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks a bunch, and we're good to go. Have a great one.
Thanks for inviting me to participate.
Yeah, thanks, Linda.
Thank you.